Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give a few seconds to people to get from the waiting room into the live recording. Welcome, everyone. As always, we always have familiar names on the Zoom call. So thank you so much. I see many names popping up. Thank you for coming back. I know many of you have been following us every week, and I also see new names, which is always great to see. So thank you for your participation in today's webinar. My name is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm the co-PI of the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. I'm talking to you from Boston, from the HEALEY Center for ALS at Mass General. And today I'm here with our patient navigation team, Catherine and Allison, who are always here every week with us and are also available to answer your questions outside of the trial, or the webinar. And today it's really an honor and pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Driss from Northwestern University. So if we can go to the next slide. Really excited to hear more about all the things that she's doing in Chicago. And on a personal note, I went to school at Northwestern for my PhD, so I remember Chicago and Northwestern well. It always has a special place in my heart. I know this center does a lot of great research and clinical care, also wonderful collaboration with Les Turner Foundation, again, doing great work for people with ALS in the Chicagoland. So with that, Dr. Driss, can you tell us more about your site?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Paganoni. Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here with you on this really very cold Chicago afternoon in January. This warms my heart to be here. And again, thank you, Sabrina. And it is really a pleasure to be part of this webinar and part of this really huge effort to bring an end to ALS. I would like to tell you a little bit about our center. If you could go to the next slide, please. Let me change my... Our clinic is called the Lois and Solia ALS Clinic, and it's named after an amazing woman, a wife and a mother who unfortunately had ALS, and whose husband back in the mid-80s had the foresight of partnering with Les Turner Foundation and establishing the really the very first ALS, multidisciplinary ALS clinic in the country. We see about 80% of the ALS patient in the greater Chicago area, and we have a great relationship with all the other ALS clinics in the city. We see patients all the way from southern Wisconsin to the northern Indiana. We get out-of-state patients. We have a very busy clinic. But I don't do this by myself. So I am a neuromuscular neurologist who specializes in ALS. I've done my fellowship at Northwestern, and I didn't know that I'm gonna stay many, many years later. When I started and joined, we were a small group, but we've grown in an amazing way and joined by many people in our team. The last person to join is Dr. Pioro, who many of you might know. He's an ALS expert from the Cleveland Clinic. We have 6 neurologists on our team, 2 amazing pulmonologists, and 1 physiatrist trained in neuromuscular medicine that we really convinced to be part of us. And of course, our team of physicians is not complete without our nurses and our multidisciplinary staff, who really are crucial in working very hard every day and making the life of ALS patient a little bit better. But what they do, you could see them there in the tiny picture I have, and the picture there shows one of our walk in the hallway last year in 2020 when we, yes, it's 2 years ago, 2020, when we couldn't do our actually live ALS fundraising walk for Les Turner Foundation. We had to do it inside. Next slide, I guess. So we are situated in the heart of downtown Chicago, beautiful city. Our campus is downtown, makes it a little bit difficult to park, but thanks to our partnership with the Les Turner Foundation, our patients don't pay for parking. It's covered. So our research patients are the same. And really, we've been very busy. I mean, in the past 2 years, the whole country, the whole world came to a halt because of this pandemic. But the ALS community has been working very, very hard, bringing this amazing trial, starting this trial against all odds. And what made it really work is our dedicated team of research coordinators. So you could see here our little selfie. So we have Ben, who unfortunately, after 5 years of working hard with us, is in the process of transitioning to another department. Thankfully, he is staying at Northwestern, make it easy, and it's a very slow transition. So we're grateful for that. Behind me, there's Emma, and Emma single-handedly actually been the main coordinator for the platform study. This is a very complex study who requires more than one coordinator, but she's been really amazing. And in the background is Dennis, and Dennis plays an amazing role. He's our research assistant, and he's our data entry person. He really works behind the scene, but his work is also very important, helps keep us all up to date in our data entry. We've been busy, as I said, in the past 2 years, and we have screened upward of 30 patients. We're currently following 18 to 20 patients. Many have transitioned to the open label portion of the study, and a lot of the patients are waiting for the result that we're gonna see soon, since this study have really enrolled at an amazing speed. I think that's all I have. I don't know if.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for introducing your team. And we're gonna be taking questions throughout the course of this session, but I know that there is a question that's specific to Northwestern. So if you don't mind, I will ask you that now, and then we can take the other more general questions later. The question is, can you talk about the status of NU9? And as a reminder, this is a compound that was tested at Northwestern by another dear colleague and friend, Hande, and it was tested in the lab with promising results. So Senda, can you tell us more about NU9?
We are patiently waiting for starting clinical trial with this compound. I mean, this compound had showed some data in animal model, so we really need to transition from the animal to the human, and that process is unfortunately lengthy. As you know, we want to make sure first that the safety of any compound is we have to be sure of the safety before moving forward. So after the mouse, usually toxicology study has to be done in higher animal, like the monkey or the dog. And after that, we can go to the healthy volunteer. This is unfortunately not a compound that we know about. This is not a drug that is already available that we could just test in patient with ALS. This is a drug that just has been developed, and we want to make sure that it's not toxic. That's the first thing, and understand what is the minimal dose that we can test. So like you, we're waiting for this. Unfortunately, those toxicology studies take time and resources. And as soon as we know anything more, we'll probably, the whole community will know about that as well.
And this question about sort of preclinical studies and science, general science about ALS reminds me to let everyone know that we're working on a schedule of scientific presentations throughout the year. So we definitely, received a lot of questions about basic science and research in general, aside from the platform trial itself during these webinars. And so Catherine and Alison are kindly putting together a schedule. And so we will work on it over the next few days so that we'll have a good schedule for 2021. And I'm sure we'll invite scientists who have been involved with these and other compounds. And actually another question for you, Senda, how many clinical trials and research studies are you currently running? I guess what's available at Northwestern for ALS patients?
So it is true that the platform trial is the highest enrolling study, and it's actually easy study to enroll to because of the inclusion criteria. But we do have other studies that are in different stages. We have at least 3 interventional study, and we have, all the study, they don't need to be interventional. We have observational study also where we are trying to follow patient and understand a little bit about the disease. Some they're Northwestern, and some are also in collaboration with other centers. We have many other studies that are waiting to start. So with with the end of the year, with Omicron, things have been delayed a little bit. So, and we actually, this is the first time, grateful for this delay. We were being able for the whole team to take some vacation at the end of last year because we have I mean, during the holidays, we've been working so almost around the clock. So there we have, I believe that every ALS patient that comes to the Lois and Solia ALS clinic at Northwestern will have an opportunity to participate in a clinical research program. Next, I don't know how much you want me to talk about this, Sabrina, but not everybody, despite the very large inclusion criteria for the platform, not everybody could qualify. And we have options. There is the expanded access program for the regimen B companion to the platform study that has enrolled many patients already. And for that, the inclusion are even more vast.
Yeah, no, I'm glad actually that you brought this up. And in fact, there is a question in the chat about whether any parts of the platform trial are open to people that have had symptoms for longer than 3 years. And so the platform trial itself is only open to people who fulfill certain eligibility criteria. But again, we understand that while these criteria for the platform trial are broader than for other trials, still not everyone can participate. And that's why we started a series of projects such as the EAP Companion Program. So a series of expanded access programs, protocols that are available to people that don't meet the strict eligibility criteria. So for example, people with symptoms longer than 3 years can enroll in the expanded access protocol of some of these drugs, including verdiperstat, which is currently tested in one of the platform trial regimens, and I know, Senda, you are enrolling for that at Northwestern, which is great. So if anyone is interested in enrolling at Northwestern in the platform trial or in any of your other projects, whether they are related to the platform trial or not, who should I contact at Northwestern?
I don't have my emails on there, but they can contact me. They can contact Emma. I think they can still contact Ben, and his email will be forwarded to us. So okay. Even though he transitioned, he's really passionate about everything we do still, which is
great.
Nice.
So maybe, Catherine, if you don't mind putting in the chat Emma's email so that we have a central contact. And we're thankful to Ben. I know we've been working with him closely for a number of years. Again, question about Northwestern. Do you have any idea about sort of a reasonable time frame for NU9 to go into trials? And perhaps you may want to talk about sort of the different phases and what kind of general expectations might be.
Right. I really don't know. I don't want to give a number of months or years and then be wrong. I'm not involved directly in these preclinical study. I hope to be involved firsthand when we start clinical trial, but I'm waiting like you. I'm expecting that to happen hopefully soon.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So maybe we can go to the next few slides to just have a quick set of updates. As you know, for those of you who are new to this webinar series, we started 2022 with the exciting news that we're going to start enrolling in regimen E, the trialose regimen, very soon. This could be really any day. We're literally just finishing some of the final operational aspects of this to be able to roll this out soon. And I see a question in the chat about specific sites. So please contact Catherine after the meeting if you have questions about specific sites and their activation status for regimen E or trialose. As discussed, I think last week on this webinar, we are going to roll out sites in groups. And the reason for that is because there are still supply chain challenges related to the pandemic, lack of some materials or other things that are needed to start the study. So we do have them, but we cannot just open it up all at the same time because we do need to manage the supplies carefully so that we can kind of have enough drug available and enough supplies available at every site. So we're gonna roll this out, and I'm sure that maybe over the next couple of weeks, when all of these plans are finalized and we want to make sure that we give you all the correct information, Catherine, we can add to the next slides sort of the batches, like which sites are gonna be opened for regimen E, but that's gonna happen really anytime soon, and we will communicate on these weekly webinars essentially kind of the rollout process and which sites are activated when. If you can go to the next slide. I do want to mention that we did complete the enrollment for the first 4 regimens. So thank you to all of you. This is really amazing. I have to say, again, not to blame the pandemic all the time, but the truth is that there's been significant disruptions to the workflow. I mean, as everyone knows, especially in the healthcare setting, in addition to the supply chain challenges. So it's really remarkable that people were willing to come in, were willing to participate. So thank you so much for, really going above and beyond to participate in this trial. That really helps research so much. So thank you for that, and for again showing up and being part of this trial. We have hundreds of people in the open label extension, which is fantastic. They'll be kept on open label extension until we know the results of these compounds. And I know in the chat, people ask, when are the results of the first 4 regimens be available? So they're going to be available later this year. So we already started kind of all the plans for, closing out the sites. So again, we have to continue to monitor the people who are on drug, both in the double-blind portion and in the open label extension, and we're working closely with all sites, including Dr. Ajroud-Driss' site to make sure that we collect all the data, we clean all the data. There are processes that are required to be able to close and then release the data. So more to come on this, and we'll give you more firm timelines over the next few weeks. If we can go to the next slide. I do want to mention that we're also expanding in terms of number of sites available. As you know, we had roughly 50 sites for the first 4 regimens, and now we are adding about 20 more sites. So some of them have come online, Georgetown and University of Southern California, and others are being kind of activated. Activation means that the sites have completed all the training requirements and all the administrative requirements to be able to be part of the trial. Because as you know, the trial has to happen exactly the same way at every site. So there's a lot of training and monitoring and procedures that need to happen in order to ensure that every dot means a large team at the particular site. So in every city we have, several people who work on the same trial. Some centers are larger, some are smaller, but essentially we need to be able to train all of them at the same, the same way, and have all the processes in place. So all of these sites will be coming online, as they complete these requirements. Next slide. And as always, Catherine and Alison are available to answer your questions, and please contact them at the phone number or email that you can see on the slide. And we will continue to have these weekly webinars, as well as we have a research newsletter if you're interested in signing up for that. Next slide. And these are 2 of the upcoming site investigators who will be joining us. So those are the ones that have already been scheduled. And again, Catherine is working on scheduling more site guests, as well as other guests that will talk about science or biostatistics, etc. So all of this, is going to happen over the next few weeks. Okay, so I think we can stop sharing this slide, and we'll take a few questions. Let me ask a question. Let me actually take a question. There's a question about AMX35. How will this fit into these trials? Well, as we discussed in previous webinars, we have always said that when drugs are approved, if drugs are FDA approved, they will be allowed in the trial. So again, obviously we don't know the exact timelines of AMX35 approval, or we're not even sure that it will be approved, but obviously we hope so. So as soon as dates are available, we will roll out protocol amendments and all necessary processes that are needed. Again, we need to see how everything aligns with the completion of the first few regimens and the rollout of the new regimens. In addition to regimen E, we also are working on other regimens, so more drugs to be tested. And again, it's a good thing that, if the standard of care changes and we have more drugs, that's great. And so that means that we're going to have, to allow them, and we're going to work it out. I would say, as you may have seen in the news, the other big announcement was the fact that there are processes in place to see if oral edaravone might be approved. So the FDA FDA is reviewing that new drug application as well. So for oral as opposed to intravenous edaravone, which obviously would make it easier to administer. So again, all of these are changes that are coming down the pipeline in general in the field of ALS. And so we'll see again, obviously we want to allow approved medications in the trial, and we'll work on the details. All right. I see a few other questions about specific sites. For example, Kansas, Hopkins. I don't have all the exact timelines of their activation for Regimen E. If you could please contact Catherine by email or phone, maybe she can look it up. And then again, in future webinars, we'll try to provide updates of the different batches of sites as they are activated. There's a suggestion here, which I think is great. As you may know, the NIH, which is the government's institute for sort of supporting and funding research, as an ALS strategic plan, kind of in draft, and all these documents are often opened up for public comments. So if you are in the ALS community and want to provide feedback to the NIH, please know that this is a good opportunity, and the deadline, I believe, is February 11th, as was suggested in the chat. So always great to provide comments. Many of these documents, many of these processes are open to public comment. So certainly great idea to participate. Then question, there's a question to reshare the slide with Catherine and Alison's contact information. So can you please, Rajini, could you please go back to this slide so that we can see the contact information for Catherine and Alison? Thank you so much. And we have QR codes for registration for these webinars, and also to sign up for the ALS link, emails and phones. So different digital platforms and tools. And also, Catherine, if you want to put your email in the chat, that would be great. Yeah, so there's a few questions about sort of FDA approval and timelines, and there's a few questions about, does it take more than 2 years to approve a drug, or what can we do to speed up approval? So maybe I can just take that. So it really depends on the data, I would say, and it depends on when a company or an investigator submits the data. So in other words, the FDA cannot even start the review until all the data has been submitted. And then after that, there are timelines that can be about 6 months if it's priority review, or a little bit longer if it's not priority review. I believe that both the reviews of AMX35 and oral edaravone are actually priority, which is good. And so those are kind of the timelines. But again, when we talk about approval process, I just want to make sure that we know that the FDA review doesn't start until the data has been submitted. So I'll just ask you, there's a couple of general clinical questions, Dr. Driss, that maybe I can ask you. How does one get ALS? Or can you tell us more about ALS risk?
Well, that's a very good question, and I wish I knew the answer. It would be very easy. One of the things that makes research very difficult is we do not understand how ALS happens. We have some ideas. There is a familial form that only 10% of patients can get. Usually they have a family history. And even in the familial form where we have certain genes, we only know about 60% of the genes that can cause the familial form. It is important now to look for a genetic form of ALS, as we have trials and hopefully soon therapy that target certain genetic forms. So if we have a genetic form, then we know. Now, what about what we call the sporadic ALS, the one that does not necessarily have a sporadic form? We do know that there are certain groups of patients that are vulnerable. For example, people in very competitive sports like Lou Gehrig's or Italian football players, but still, even in these cohorts, we don't understand exactly what triggered the disease, or the NFL players. But we do know that's probably a combination of an environmental factor. For example, we know sex, being a male, increases probability of the disease. We know middle age, we know smoking, pesticide. So we know that it's a combination of an environmental factor and a genetic predisposing factor. We know that there are certain genes there that increase the risk of ALS without causing it directly. So it's a very hot topic. And actually, one of the things that the platform trial does, not only is it testing experimental drugs, but it's also looking at ways of understanding or answering this question: how does ALS happen? Understand what we call the pathophysiology of the disease. This is what makes this trial unique. Even if a drug doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out, I think the information we get will get us a step forward to understand why this disease happens.
Yeah, there's a question related to this. Can ALS come from high-dose chemotherapy?
Not necessarily ALS per se, but we do know that chemotherapy destroys nerve cells. It does cause what we call a peripheral neuropathy. Usually it's a disease where you have difficulty with feeling and sometimes weakness. But can certain drugs cause something that may look like ALS? It is possible. I wouldn't necessarily exclude it completely, but it's not very common.
Yeah, so selected chemotherapy agents can give muscle weakness or peripheral neuropathy. So I guess, again, but one thing, right, is ALS proper, right? One thing is something that mimics or gives weakness or neuropathy. So it's all in the details. And I think your doctor can look at the exact exam and results of the EMG to be able to tell. So can you tell us more about how you talk to your patients about edaravone or Radicava? So that the comment in the chat is that, why would somebody want to take it by mouth if we're not sure about the effect by IV? That's the comment. So maybe you can tell us what you discuss with your patients.
Yes, it's an important discussion, and it's a discussion that really changed over the past 4 or 5 years that this drug has been approved. We know that edaravone works, but how does it work? It does slow down the progression of the disease. However, this is not an antibiotic. This is not an infection where you're going to take an antibiotic and the disease is going to go away. The ALS, unfortunately, is going to continue to progress. And measuring how much edaravone slows the progression is very difficult. We know how much in the trial, but it's difficult to extrapolate that to every single patient. I cannot tell my patient, okay, take edaravone today if your disease is supposed to progress by X in this amount of time. When you take edaravone, that will change. Unfortunately, we don't have that information. We know that edaravone is safe. We know that edaravone has an effect. Is it a cure? Definitely not. Now we leave it a little bit to the patient to decide how intrusive is getting an IV infusion every day for 14 days. It depends. And I have patients who have been on edaravone, have seen really a positive effect. And I have patients who tried it and decided to stop it because they don't think it's working for them. So it's really a discussion to have with your neurologist. And it's a decision that is made between the neurologist and the patient. And what I think about ALS therapy in the future, I don't think we're going to have a blockbuster drug that's going to stop the disease. I think we're going to have multiple drugs that each one of them have a small effect. And if we put them all together, we may get significant effect on the progression of the disease.
I know we are almost at time when we're having a high volume of questions, which is great. I think people want to hear from you, Senda. So a couple of questions, interesting that they came back to back. Can COVID cause ALS, or can the COVID vaccines cause ALS?
I think I can answer no and no to both. I know that COVID can cause neurological changes, and we haven't seen ALS. Maybe it hasn't been long enough time to see that. It may sometimes, as Sabrina said earlier, for the chemotherapy, it may cause weakness that may mimic ALS, but you need to be evaluated by a neurologist to make sure. We haven't seen it directly related to ALS yet. Can COVID vaccine causes ALS? I have not seen it. I don't think so. But again, COVID vaccine, like any vaccine, could cause weakness or a syndrome like a Guillain-Barré syndrome that if it's only motor can look like ALS. Again, every single thing that happened needs to be evaluated by expert. We don't have like a direct pathway from COVID or COVID vaccine to ALS.
Yeah. Along the same lines, somebody commented that they had a sports injury and then a car accident, and right after that, ALS started. So maybe you can comment. I mean, the thing is, obviously many things happen in a person's life. At least that's been my experience. And then after them, ALS starts, and so it's actually very natural to ask yourself, could that have caused ALS? So what's your experience? Do you hear that a lot, or is there any data?
I do. I mean, a stressful event, whether it's like surgery, for example, it's not unusual. We have patient go through surgery and then come back afterward with ALS. Or have like a big infection or flu-like symptoms, and then afterward have ALS. We've seen that definitely, but we don't necessarily know a direct cause and effect.
And actually, to this point, there's another interesting question. Somebody's asking, can you have a genetically based or familiar form of ALS without anyone else in your family having ALS? So where does this start?
That is a very good question. There is something that is called incomplete penetrance. So some of the genes that cause ALS can skip generation, and then they may not be, it may not look like a hereditary, it may look like a sporadic, because either prior generation died early, didn't have the time to develop ALS, or the gene itself may have skipped a generation. So yeah, definitely. And that's why it's important to do genetic testing, even in the absence of actual family history. Sometimes patients are adopted, they don't know anything about their family history. So I wouldn't exclude it.
Yeah, and then actually to put together several comments and questions that were asked today, it seems like sometimes there might be more than one cause or triggers to someone's ALS. So for example, we don't have data on direct effect of just one event, and that's the only cause of ALS. But we do have some data to show that ALS could be precipitated by convergence of genetic risk factors, perhaps some other genetic predisposition, but also life events. Obviously, not everyone who plays sports at a high level develops ALS, or not everyone who has COVID develops ALS, or it's no single risk factor is sufficient. Sometimes it's just possible that perhaps in a given individual, the combination of different things that we don't fully understand yet might actually lead to disease in that person. But again, there's no way to predict, and there's nothing that anyone did wrong, right? It's just that it just so happens that there are very complex mechanisms at play. And that's why I think trying to develop multiple treatments that can be used in combination, maybe to try to address the different triggers could be helpful, again, because it's not the same. And I see here in the actually in the chat, there's really a high volume of questions about sort of, brain injury or statins or other medications that, have been reported in connection to ALS. Again, there isn't a one cause and effect directly, but there's some risk factors or other things that are thought to potentially contribute. More research is needed because we don't have any final cause and effect for any of these non-genetic factors.
There is a tipping point that happens, and we don't understand what pushes somebody over the edge, what pushes that motor neuron over the edge. And we are all born with a certain type of resilience. So the motor neuron is the same. Every single motor neuron is resilient in its different way. And we're trying to understand that.
Yeah, and there's also a great question about sort of mechanisms in terms of elevation of certain proteins, complement, TP43 in ALS, TBI, all of this is true. So there are different molecules that are known to be altered in different neurological diseases or traumatic accidents. And again, we're still trying to figure out sort of what's the beginning of this, what are the contributing factors, why would they push people over the tipping point, in some cases. So again, nothing that, I always tell my patients, sometimes they ask themselves, what if I had not done that or this, I always say, there's no way to predict and no way this could have been prevented. It's just, that sometimes there are things that come together that we don't fully understand. So hopefully we will in the future. In terms of going back to the platform trial. There's a few questions about results, safety profile of drugs, or kind of, when we're going to have the results. So we will continue to provide information on these webinars. Results cannot be shared until we have the final data, and that's going to be later in 2022. And somebody asks if they're going to be by regimen. Yes, absolutely. It will be regimen A will have its own results, regimen B will have its own results, etc. So I think we got most of the questions. There's questions about the logistics of the infusions in regimen E. I do want to mention that we're going to have a dedicated regimen E webinar. It's not been scheduled yet because we're waiting for approval of the slide deck. Everything that we show here needs to be approved by the ethics committee, and then scheduling with the scientists from the company. And so we'll get you all the detailed answers to the regimen E questions on that webinar. So Senda, any final word from you?
I really would like to thank all the patients, and specifically all our patients who participated in platform. It's amazing because they powered through. They understood how important this is. And even though most of the patients did transition to the open label portion of the study, I think the ones who couldn't because of progression of the disease, they were amazing in hanging on there and then making that 24-week visit as much as they could. So that is heroic kind of effort from the patient. And really, the only way we can get anywhere is thanks to that. And I really want to thank them for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to add anything to that. Well said. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.